All right, I guess I should have paid attention to the little thing that popped up on my screen that says you're almost out of power and you should plug in. Because basically what happened is my video got cut off there. So what I'm going to try to do here is pick up right where I left off. I'm using tonight Visual Studio Code, which is a free text editor coding tool from Microsoft, multi-platform. It'll run on Unix and Mac machines as well. It is not Visual Studio. It's a much stripped down tool, but a lot of people have been using it and really like it quite a bit. So what I've done here is I went ahead, as I was saying in the last video before I got cut off, and I created some folders. Basically I have my Fall 2016 folder, I have my Web 1 folder inside of it, Unit 4 inside of that, and then I created a little folder for the stuff I'm about to do here in class, and I entitled it Box Model Demo. In Visual Studio Code, I clicked the little icon right here that allowed me to basically attach the work that I was doing to the folder I was in. Normally you'll see like a button here that'll say open folder, and I did that preemptively so it was already in that folder. But if you want to have access to the files that you're working with right within the environment, that capability exists. Now inside the editor here, I do have an untitled file. What is the very first thing I should do, you guys? Save it. Yes, and then a doc type. And the reason we save it first is for a few reasons, but mostly as soon as you save it, the color coding kicks in, and then that helps. Now, I'm not intending for this to be my home page, so if I want to call it, whatever, I will. And that's exactly what I'm going to call it. But it does have an HTML file extension, so now my color coding will be available. What was the first thing I needed on the page? A doc type. And then I'm also going to zoom in a little bit here so you guys can hopefully see it better. Is that large enough or bigger? A little bigger? A little bigger. All right. What else do we need? Well, isn't that interesting how it works? It's trying to indent me when it doesn't know my habit of wanting to open and close my tags all at the same time. So what should sit inside of HTML? Isn't it kind of cool how it gives a description too? I like that it also automatically closes the tags. We should probably create a style sheet too, I think, right? Yeah, somebody's saying it out loud. I can hear you. But we need a file to link to first. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. And once again, I'm going to save it right away. I'm just going to call it box styles. You can call it anything you want, really. But this is my choice here, box styles. And then I need to create a link to that document. You guys remember the syntax here? You're doing this too. Type. Is that what you were indicating? But really the most important part here is this. And what's the file name? It says right there, box styles. Anything else we need in the head section of the document, really? I think that'll be adequate for now. Then we need a body section. And we should save our work. And I'm going to basically build mostly divs here by intent because they're kind of generic. I can apply names and styles to them real easily. They don't have any pre-built styles that go with them. So they're really kind of a good example of kind of blank slate for coding. All right, so I'm going to create a div. I'm going to give it an ID, and I'm going to call it number 1. Or maybe we'll call it box 1. You get a closing div tag in there right away. And then I'm going to create another div. We can throw some token text in. Make sure you save your work as you're working. What I try to do is when I'm saving, I try to verbalize the fact that I'm doing Control-S to save, just so you guys know that I'm doing that, but that should be a habit. Because we have most of our structure that we're going to work with here already. Now it's just a matter of playing with those styles and see what they do. And it doesn't matter what browser you use here, but you can come to your folder, and I'm just going to right-click this. And usually I'm working with Chrome, but let's go to Firefox for now. Let's use Firefox as our tool. And this is what I've created. Now, keep in mind that all the stuff I'm doing here also exists inside of Chrome and Edge and Opera, whatever browser, and Safari, whatever browser you choose to use. But I'm right-clicking on the open part of the page, and I'm choosing Inspect Element. And we've looked at this already, so I know you guys are somewhat familiar with it. But what we're doing here is I'm using the Inspect Element tool to show you how the stuff is laying out in the browser window. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to maximize the window, and watch as I hover over any of the HTML elements and how it highlights up above. Like right now down here I'm highlighting or hovering over body. Notice what it's doing with that is it's indicating where the body is on the page. There's a little name that pops up, right, that shows, all right, this is the body you're pointing to and this is the size of it. I know for those of you sitting in the back that might be a little bit hard to see. If that is the case and you would like me to dial you into the Google Hangout that's going on right now so you can see the code better, just let me know. All right, so hovering over the elements highlights them on the screen. So that's the whole body, but then I'm going to go over each one of these divs, and you see how it breaks down the div? Highlights it. Notice right now that neither one of these divs has any spacing around it. The only spacing that you see is up in the margins here around the top and the sides are the settings that are built into the browser. The browser automatically adds 10 pixels around the edges. Just that's default. Okay. Let's see if we can work with some of the CSS now to make it do things. First thing that would be helpful would be to remember what the IDs were, box 1 and 2. So I'm going to create # box 1 and then I'm going to do # box 2. Okay, it's telling me not to use empty rule sets. I did that on purpose. All right, so let's do a couple things to give it size, shape, and definition. So I'm going to take the first box, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a width. I'm just choosing an arbitrary amount here for no particular reason, aside from that it'll fit on the screen. So I'm going to do 500 pixels. I'm going to do a background. Actually, let's see if it'll trigger. Isn't that beautiful? It just triggers it for you. Or maybe I can do this. See, I'm learning this tool as I'm going. So you're expecting me to be an expert on it. You guys do expect me to be an expert on it, don't you? Yeah. I am randomly typing in numbers here. Well, I guess that's nice light green. Yeah, it does, isn't it? What would be even cooler is if I could leverage that and just work with the color palette directly, but apparently it doesn't have that capability. Or else I'm missing it. That could be the case. Actually, you know what? I should try that. I bet you if I typed in like a hex number. All right, well, apparently that was wishful thinking. What were my numbers? Oop. All right, I'm also going to create a border. And for the border, I'm going to go 2 pixels, solid black. Okay, I'm saving my work. I'm going to go back to the browser for a minute, and I'm going to refresh just to see what we have. All right, that's what I created so far. Notice if I hover, what's the size of the box? It's not 500 wide, is it? Yeah, the border is adding to it. And it indicates it right there, 504 by 24. Notice also on the right-hand side in the Inspect Element tool how all the styles are highlighted. So whatever element here is clicked on and active, it'll bring up the styles on the right. Did you know that you can come in here with these little checkboxes, and maybe you know this already and maybe not, and you can click on them. So for example, see as I hover, how the little checkbox pops up? Watch what happens when I click it. So not only can I see what those styles are, I can turn them on or off, or I can come in here and actually change them. This does not affect the source document, but I can see the results in the browser. So one of the ways you can get your page layouts right, if you're struggling, is to play with the settings here. It doesn't ruin your document, and you can just copy the stuff over. The other thing that you can do, which is something I am going to do right now, is I can actually add a new style right here. Isn't that cool? All right, so I'm pointing that out because I think it's a very helpful tool. Chrome, Edge, Opera all do the same thing. Safari does too. Lots of fun. All right, so I think that it might be appropriate to also give us a height here. And let's just make it a big square. Now, box 2 needs some stuff too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this stuff so I don't have to type all of it. But I'm going to make this box a little smaller. I'll make it 200 by 200. I don't want it to be quite that blue. See, this is not a good way to pick colors, by the way. Oh my God, no. All right, that's not really much better. But let's try a different type of line here. Let's do a dashed line. And let's change our color to, for the border, oh, isn't that wonderful? We'll see if that even shows up. And actually, let's make that border a little more dramatic. Let's make it 8 pixels. Let's go back to the browser. I'm doing a refresh. And this is what I've created. Notice a few things here, right? First of all, normal page flow. This div appears above this div in the code. So on the page, it appears above this div, right? And even though neither one of these fill the whole width of the screen, they still reserve that space. So the normal flow pushes it down to the next line. This is, part of the challenge of all this. Let's do something kind of interesting, and let's go back to the HTML document. And I'm actually going to take this first div, or the second div, excuse me, and I'm going to put it inside the first div. And this is kind of what they were doing in that slide. And then let's refresh again. So you get a box inside of a box. Let's play with this a little bit. And first of all, let's take this div and put it back outside for right now. Saving our work. I'm going to start adding some of the other properties that we were talking about. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add padding. And I'm going to come up with an amount of 30 pixels. And this is for box 1. If I come back and do a refresh, notice how far in we're pushed from the edges. If I had enough content to fill this box, I'd have that amount of space all the way around. If I take a look at my Inspect Element tool and hover, see what that does? And how helpful this tool is. It's really a very cool tool. Notice that the border stays in place, right? The padding is on the inside. Notice the size of the object. 564. I said width 500. but we added 30 pixels on every side. So in one dimension, that's 60 pixels, left and right, top or bottom. And then also the border, which was how many pixels? 2. Yep, 4 in each direction. 4, yeah, in each dimension, yes. And that's why we have now 564. Those pixels are important. That's kind of the point there. All right, so you see how that works. Let's do a little bit of playing with the second box too. I'm going to put the same padding on the second box. However, with the second box, I'm going to also add a margin, but I'm going to be selective. I'm going to say margin top 20 pixels. I'm going to save my work. I'm going to go back and I'm going to take a look. For right now, notice that this first box, normal page flow, second box sits directly underneath it because there is no spacing outside that border on the first box or the second box. Margin is effectively 0, so it doesn't register. But now I've added some margin and I also added padding. Did you see the two things that happened? The box got bigger and now I have a little bit of space in between. I think for the sake of our examples here, I'm going to start making this a little bit smaller so I have a little bit more screen space to work with. And maybe I'll do the same here. Let's take a look at that. All right, let's create another box. And we're going to be, playing with the code. And this is really kind of one of the best ways to learn, I think. So I got box 2. Now I'm going to create box 3. Apparently we need some word wrap here. All right, I haven't given box 3 any styles. Where is it going to appear on the page, and what is it going to look like? Okay, I heard a couple people saying something. Where's box 3 going to appear? Given this code, where is it going to appear? Right underneath box 2, that is correct. I'm just trying to clean this up here. So let's see if that actually turns out to be the case. Should probably save it. Notice no space. Let's make this behave a little bit. We're going to copy some of these styles here. I think I have to go with Peach Puff. Apparently that's one of the named colors now. And let's give it a different kind of border. In fact, let's do something kind of interesting here. Uh-oh, I broke it. So you see what I did? I did a couple like kind of weird things. First of all, I put a border on it, but only on the left, right? It's kind of an odd choice. But can you see what I was kind of meaning about like how you can maybe use it as a graphical element of sorts? Because when we think border, we kind of generically think that we have to sit inside of this kind of a layout, but there's really a whole lot more that you can do with it. So, I mean, I could even take that border left and make it something like 80 pixels. That might not be an aesthetic choice you make by design, but it might be. Who knows? But what else are you noticing? I put the padding in there, and what about all this extra text? Yeah. There's a property, there's a CSS property, and I know it's upcoming in the slideshow here, and I know that I've kind of broken out of order, but there's what we call an overflow property. So one very common technique that people use is they'll add this style called overflow, and then they do hidden. That's a real common technique. So if the text I'm adding is bigger than the box I'm putting it into, it hides it. Not very elegantly though. See how it's all cut off? So how do I find out what other techniques I can apply? Well, one very simple thing you can do is CSS overflow, and you just look it up. Hey, look, there's another option. It's called scroll. I didn't even have to dig very far. So what this one does is it puts a little scroll box on it. But notice it does a scroll box in two directions whether you want it or not. You can control it though. And I'm sure that W3's got a lot of explanation on it. So here's some of the values you can use. The overflow would be visible, hidden, scroll, we tried these two. Visible just means that it spills out of the box oh well. Auto, and that one it says if overflow is clipped, the scroll bar should be added to see the rest of the content. So that might be a consideration too. Let's try switching to that. Yeah, that bottom's gone now. See that? So that one's a good choice. If you have a box that has a lot of content in it. Some of the other things, initial. Well, apparently we have to declare that, and then there's inherit, and I'm not really too worried about inherit. Inherit basically means that we do whatever the containing element is doing. That's what that typically means. All right, so that just gives you an idea of how to work with overflow. Once again, let's play with the styles a little bit. I think that's pretty darn ugly. Maybe the box could be a little bit bigger. Let's 200 by 100 is good. It's got a little bit of padding in there. How about in this case we do a little margin left. And let's do 30 pixels. Let's save it. Take a look. See how it moved? We can also maybe do margin top. So now we moved it down a little bit. But here's where we're getting to the next part, and this is in the slideshow, so I'm kind of jumping back over there now. We were talking about normal flow. We showed how you can put something inside of something else. That's normal too. But what comes next is, what if you need one of these to, instead of sit down here, sit next to it? This is where the float property comes in. There's some contingencies though, right? One thing is if you're trying to squeeze something into a space, you have to make sure that that space is available. Right now, even though I do like an inspect element here and I look at any one of these things, take a look at the little dotted line that extends off of that first div. The light blue is the content, the darker blue is the padding, and then you have the border. But notice the dots, basically this section that comes off this way, that object, even though it's not the full width of the screen, still occupies that screen space. Because a div is a block level element, it fills the whole width of whatever is containing it. That's how it works. I can't put anything up into that spot even if I wanted to. Not without applying a float to it or absolute positioning. So let's take a look at how the float works by basically taking the second box, and I'm just going to type on there float left. Watch what happens with this command. Not what you expected, is it? What'd you think would happen? Yeah, you would think that this would come up here. But basically what I did is I turned on float for this object, so it's floating as far left as it can go in this scenario. Right? So since this now is occupying only that part of the screen, it is allowing this one to jump up a line, breaking what would be normal page flow, and it'll go up to the first position it can possibly go to and fill the rest of the screen. Remember, my objective was to move this up here. So apparently I have to apply that same style to the one before it. So let's do that. Let's refresh. This is interesting though. There's a couple dozen different things happening here, really, but there's a couple of interesting things happening here. One is, take a look at the other styles that we're applying, and I'm going to see if I can split screen us here so we can kind of see the code and then see the effect. Notice something else that happened when I narrowed up the browser? We told this to float left. That allowed the next thing in the page flow, which is this, to come up and fill that space. We told that to float left. So this is trying to come up here if it could, but it can't. So where does it sit? Back into the normal page flow, which is beneath this one. That is a little weird. If this box here, box 2, was higher, if I made it, let's say, 500 pixels tall, I come back over here and refresh, so it still appears below because it can't appear to the right, but notice the normal page flows after this object is done. So you see some of the weird behaviors that are happening here? And they're kind of interesting behaviors, frankly. Some of it is not what you would think in terms of how it would lay. Now watch as I widen the browser, how that jumps into position. Do you notice anything else that's happening aside from that jumping? Notice how this box is moving down? Why? Somewhere I have a margin on the top. Well, this one's 20 pixels. That seems about right. This one's got 40 pixels of margin on the top. So that 40 pixels here is attributed to this. But this one's also got a margin left of 30. So shouldn't there be a space here? You would think. This is why margins can be very tricky. What's happening here, if I hover over that object, the margin is being read, but do you see that yellow area and how it hangs over onto the preceding object? What it's telling you is it's effectively ignoring that because the page flow is broken. So if I actually want to move this over that many pixels, I can't do it exactly with this technique. In fact, I can keep increasing this, and I don't even have to go to the code to do it. I can do it right here, right? Nothing? Do you see what's happening, how the margins are growing? So how wide is box 2? 150. So chances are I have to get much bigger than that. So maybe if I made this 200 pixels. Do you see what's happening here? It's really kind of doing a little bit of a mind bender here. Because when you're floating stuff, that margin property in some ways is completely ignored because the page flow is broken. So it's going to try to push against where the page flow should normally be. So in order to actually make that move over, I have to get this number up pretty high for it to actually move it. Yeah, it makes no sense. Ah. And Brian, you hit right on it. That's exactly where I was taking us. Well, okay, I changed it here, but not there. Oops. Let's save this. Let's do a refresh in the browser. Now this is going back with the original 40 pixels. So now that I'm floating this object as well, then some semblance of page flow is restored. So that left margin is actually working now. Now take a look at this technique. And instead of floating left on the second box, I'm now going to float right. That is not what you guys expected, is it? So what happened is this is floating left, that is floating right, this one's also set to float left, but it can't float left of something that's to the right, so it jumps in between. Now, can you imagine when I was learning this stuff, we didn't have all the materials that you guys have or a teacher to tell me how to do it, and I was just sitting there going, oh my God, what is happening? Bring back tables. We'll talk about tables coming up, but that was a technique we used to overcome these problems. But really, it's not a problem. It's actually an opportunity. Isn't that what they say? So if I do want this box, though, to jump back down to where it goes, in other words, not react to those floats, I put in a command like this, which is clear both, which ignores all the left floats and the right floats that come before it and puts things back into normal page flow the way they should be. And then if I come back here and refresh, it dropped back down. This is floated left. This is floated right. This cleared the floats and dropped back into normal page flow. You can leverage these things to do a whole bunch of page layouts. It takes a little bit of planning and a little bit of forethought to get it to work right. And initially it can be frustrating, but the best way that you can overcome it is to look at examples. What's really cool about our book is the author's done a great job, I think, of talking about these things, because he's got some like layout templates that we could work from. All right, before we jump to that, let's take a look at this particular property. We're going to look at the layout things in just a moment. Typically when we're working with CSS, things just appear on the page. However, we can control how they appear. Believe it or not, there are styles to make things not appear. So if I wanted, I could take my box 2 and I could just say display none. All gone. Why would you go to the trouble, though, of doing that? The why for that is you can actually write CSS and JavaScript to turn that on and off. So maybe you'll write some code where you click a button and it changes it from display none to display visible. Okay? Or vice versa. So there's a reason for it. Okay, but there's also times when sometimes you want to put stuff on the screen you don't necessarily want people to see it, but it's still there. That's an even stranger scenario. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why. Jason was just mentioning, for those that you can't hear, that would you do that for SEO reasons? Absolutely. In fact, I had a website that some of my students built a while back, and I'm assuming it hasn't changed. So this is a student build website, and I think if you dig in here and you take a look, all right, see this little div he's got right there, or they actually, that's a div. And I'm looking at the styles on the side. All right, actually it doesn't say. Oh, see what they did? They didn't do display none. They did a different trick. They set a Z index. They made it basically in the background. But what happens though is the content is still red, so it can help with SEO. It's kind of a trick that's not really necessarily encouraged, but it works. Okay, let's go back. All right, so some of these are interesting because anything that's got the ability to be on a page has the capability of having one of these styles applied. So you can make stuff disappear, you can make stuff show. But why would we have something that says display block and display inline? Because we have elements that are inline elements and block elements, and guess what? An image, for example, is an inline element. So if I was to find an image, and maybe I should just do it for sake of demonstration, let's just go out to Google. Well, here, I'll just grab this little planet Earth here. And then I'm going to look at the document. I'm going to throw that image right in here. Was that called home PNG? I'm going to do a refresh here. That's a little big. Where's the other one? Did I lose something? Oh yeah, I said display none. Apparently it worked. It's good for paying attention, right? Well, let's make it display. Let's just get rid of that. Images are inline elements. Okay? So it will work in this spot. I can make it display as a block. So in this case, I don't have any other images on the page, so I'm just going to apply it to the one. But I can tell it to display block, basically effectively changing it from an inline element and its behaviors and changing it into a block level element where it's going to fill the full space of the screen. And if I did this correctly, I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, and I refresh, do you notice what happened? This is still floating right. This is sitting in the spot it's sitting in because this is floated left, but because this is now a block level element, it's not allowing anything else in this area. Now interestingly, you can also take block level items and make them behave as inline elements as well. The other one that's useful, and the one that they have listed on the slide, is this one called InlineBlock. It will allow things to behave as a block but still sit side by side. And there's a very specific reason this was developed, which you're going to see in a little bit, and that is basically so that we can create horizontal navigation. One method for doing it. So that's one of the tricks with that. Okay, let's move on to the layout pages. In fact, I think this is another good time for a break. Let's take a break and I'll start a fresh video and then we'll do some more coding.